In a maze where shadows twist and fear speaks in familiar whispers, Jesus leads his disciples through their darkest doubts, challenging them to confront their hidden fears, trust in faith, and discover a truth that will forever transform their souls. The morning light was still faint, casting a soft amber glow over the land as the disciples gathered at the edge of a thick forest. This was no ordinary forest. Within its tangled depths lay the infamous maze of fear. Stories circulated about the labyrinth. It was said that the paths twisted to confuse even the wisest and that shadows moved without reason. The maze was not just physical. It seemed to embody the fears, regrets, and anxieties of those who entered. A cold breeze swept through, making the disciples shiver despite the growing warmth of dawn. Peter glanced at the others, his expression filled with both curiosity and apprehension, while Thomas stood with his arms crossed, visibly skeptical about whatever task lay ahead. Jesus stood at the center of the gathering, calm and serene, yet there was a weight to his gaze as he looked at each disciple, a quiet depth that made them pause and listen with undivided attention. "This maze represents the fears within us," he began, his voice gentle yet commanding. "Today I will walk with each of you through this place, where our fears might call out, our doubts might grow loud and shadows might seem real. But remember, you are not alone. I am with you." He paused, allowing his words to settle. The disciples shifted uneasily, the realization dawning on them that this journey was not simply through a maze of walls and paths, but a journey through the depths of their own spirits. Peter took a step forward, his gaze resolute but hesitant. "Lord, are you saying that we must face our fears here today?" His voice wavered, a subtle crack betraying the courage he tried to muster. Beside him, John, ever the steady and introspective one, nodded silently, a flicker of understanding passing over his face. Thomas, however, let out a low breath, his brow furrowed. "But how can we know we'll make it out?" he asked, glancing warily at the maze. "This place, it feels unnatural, as if it's alive." His words echoed the thoughts of many, and a silence fell over the group, each disciple wrestling with his own private worries. Jesus turned his gaze to Thomas, compassion and wisdom in his eyes. "Fear too can feel alive," he said softly, "but it is a shadow that loses its strength in the light of truth. When fear speaks, it speaks of things it does not know, tries to control what it cannot understand. But faith," he paused, his voice carrying a gentle power, "faith is a light that cannot be extinguished." His words hung in the air, and one by one, the disciples felt a quiet strength settle within them, a reassurance that despite their fears they could face whatever lay ahead. They turned to face the entrance of the maze, each one feeling the weight of what was to come. Without further hesitation, Jesus led them forward, stepping into the shadows. One by one the disciples followed, each crossing the threshold into the unknown. The maze loomed above them, its walls towering and silent, and as they walked, the light behind them faded. The world seemed to shrink to just the narrow path ahead, their every footstep muffled by the thick grass. Together, they ventured into the maze of fear, a place where shadows would test their hearts and where each would be forced to confront the darkness within. As they moved further into the maze, the air around them grew dense and still, carrying with it an inexplicable chill. The light dimmed, filtered only faintly through the thick canopy above, casting a greenish glow over the narrow, winding paths. It was eerily silent, save for the occasional rustle of unseen creatures moving within the hedges. The disciples walked in a quiet line, each step taking them deeper into a place where comfort and familiarity seemed to fade. The path was damp underfoot, and a subtle mist began to settle around them, wrapping the maze in an almost ghostly veil. It was as if the world they knew had fallen away, replaced by something ancient, something that tugged at the deepest recesses of their minds. Before long they reached their first fork in the path. To the left, there was an open, sunlit path that wound smoothly and invitingly ahead, bright flowers lining the edges and a gentle breeze stirring the leaves. To the right, however, the path was narrow, shrouded in darkness, with only the faintest glimmer of light guiding its way. The disciples hesitated, drawn to the comfort of the brighter path. Peter, feeling a need to speak, looked over at Jesus, a question lingering in his eyes. "Lord," he began, his voice steady but uncertain, "the path to the left seems safer. Perhaps we should go that way?" Thomas, standing beside him, nodded in agreement, his relief apparent. "Yes, the lighted way seems far less foreboding," he added, his voice tinged with hope. For a moment, a murmur of agreement rose among the group, the left path promising an escape from the oppressive darkness of the maze. The right path seemed more daunting, its shadows deepening with every glance, as though it hid secrets not meant to be uncovered. Jesus stood silently, his gaze moving from one disciple to the next, understanding their hesitation. But then, with a gentle nod, he turned toward the darker path, the one cloaked in shadows and uncertainty. "Sometimes the path we are meant to walk does not appear safe or comfortable," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength that silenced their doubts. "But faith is about stepping forward even when we cannot see the end. I ask you to trust me, and I promise I will lead you through." His words resonated deeply, and though each of them felt the pull to retreat to the comfort of the brighter path, their faith in Jesus compelled them to follow him. With a deep breath, Peter stepped forward, followed by John and the others, until they were all moving into the shadowed path, leaving the comfort of light behind. Each step into the darkness felt like a test of their resolve, and yet, with Jesus walking just ahead, their fears slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. In that moment, they understood that following him was an act of faith in itself, and so they pressed on, trusting that wherever he led, they would find the strength to face it. The group trudged along the narrow path for what felt like hours, until they reached a small clearing. Pale, silvery light filtered down from above, illuminating the clearing just enough for them to see each other clearly. They paused, grateful for the brief respite, yet each felt a strange heaviness in the air, as though the maze itself was watching, waiting. The silence hung thickly around them, amplifying every thought, every worry that had been buried just beneath the surface. Peter, who had been silent for most of the journey, found himself struggling to contain the thoughts swirling in his mind. He glanced at Jesus and then at the other disciples before finally speaking, his voice low and uncertain. "Lord, I feel a burden that I cannot shake," he confessed, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I fear that I am not enough, not strong enough, not faithful enough. There are moments I feel as if I'm walking a path too great for me." His voice cracked slightly, and a silence fell over the group, each disciple sensing the rawness of his words. Jesus turned to him, his expression filled with compassion. He knelt beside Peter, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Peter," he said softly, "strength is not in never feeling fear, but in moving forward despite it. The doubts you carry, the fears that cloud your heart, they do not make you less. They are simply shadows that test your faith, and your faith is stronger than any shadow." The disciples continued down the narrow, darkened path, the silence heavy as they followed Jesus deeper into the maze. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at another fork in the path, and this time the choice seemed even more unnerving. One path was filled with soft, ghostly whispers, faint but distinct, almost as if calling out to them by name. The disciples froze, each feeling the eerie chill run down their spine. The voices were unsettling, tempting in a way they couldn't quite explain, as if they whispered of things they secretly feared or yearned for. Thomas, ever the skeptic, was visibly shaken. His face paled as he strained to listen, though he looked as though he wished to cover his ears. "Lord," he murmured, his voice laced with a quiet panic, "those whispers, they feel like they know me, like they're speaking to my deepest fears." The other disciples nodded, a quiet murmur passing through the group. Some even felt an inexplicable pull toward the voices, as though they promised comfort, an escape from the hardship of their journey. Peter, feeling the lure of the familiar, glanced at the brighter path, a whispering echo of his own voice reaching out, reminding him of his moments of pride, his failures and his doubts. But when he looked back at Jesus, he saw an unwavering presence that anchored him, pulling him back from the edge of his doubts. Sensing their struggle, Jesus spoke, his voice a steadying force in the midst of the turmoil. Fear often disguises itself, speaking to us in voices that sound familiar, tempting us toward paths of ease or false comfort. He said, his eyes resting on each of them. But true peace is found in trusting beyond what these voices tell you. Fear lies, promising safety yet offering only confusion. Remember, I am with you. Trust me and follow the path of faith even when it seems less certain. With these words, Thomas took a deep breath, trying to calm his heart. Though fear still tugged at him, he chose to trust Jesus' words over the whispers. Slowly he took a step forward, followed by the others, each choosing the path that was less inviting but filled with faith. Together they walked forward, leaving the echoing whispers behind, their hearts steadied by the quiet assurance of Jesus' presence. As they ventured further, the maze seemed to morph around them, casting shadows that twisted and shifted, almost alive with memories from each disciple's past. It was as if the maze itself had become a mirror, reflecting back moments they had buried deep within. The air felt thick with a haunting familiarity, memories coming to life in flashes that made them pause, each one facing scenes they'd rather forget. John walked quietly, lost in thought, as an image flickered before him. A memory of his family, his mother's face softened with worry as he announced he would leave to follow Jesus. He remembered her tearful eyes, the fear she held that he was abandoning the life she had envisioned for him. His heart clenched and he felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Had he disappointed her? Had his choice brought her fear instead of pride? He wrestled with these thoughts, feeling a part of his resolve weaken under the weight of guilt. Beside him, Jesus placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, sensing his struggle without a word needing to be spoken. "John," he said, his voice as soothing as a river's flow, "your love for them and your journey with me are not at odds. Faith deepens love even when it requires sacrifice. Sometimes, love demands that we walk a path that others may not understand. Trust that they are held by the same love that holds you." John felt a weight lift from his heart, a newfound peace filling him as he walked forward, reassured and renewed. Further down the path, James faced his own haunting memory, a friend he had lost, a life he couldn't save. The guilt had lingered in him for years, shaping his fears and weakening his spirit. The pain of that moment, his hesitation, his choice to turn away, played out again before him, raw and unfiltered. James's face tightened as he remembered, feeling the ache of regret searing through him. But as he looked up, he saw Jesus' compassionate gaze, as though he understood every unspoken word, every hidden regret. "James," Jesus said softly, "your love for him is eternal, transcending even the choices that haunt you. Guilt does not define love. Release the burden, for love is a bond that no fear or failure can break." James's eyes filled with tears, and he felt the years of guilt dissolve in that one moment of understanding. For the first time he felt a profound peace, as if a wound had been healed. Each disciple carried forward, their hearts lighter as the memories faded into the mist. The maze had shown them their past, but now they walked with a new understanding, strengthened by Jesus' love and wisdom. The further they journeyed, the more oppressive the darkness became. The path narrowed, the walls towering above them, and the cold, silent air pressing down on them, growing thicker and heavier with each step. Shadows seemed to creep along the edges, casting eerie, distorted shapes that played tricks on their eyes. Every step was a struggle, the maze seemingly growing darker with every turn. The disciples' footsteps slowed, and doubt began to resurface, settling into the quiet spaces between breaths. Peter, usually so bold, felt the darkness in his heart matching the shadows around him. He could no longer ignore the fear that had quietly followed him all his life. the fear of failing, of falling short of the great expectations placed upon him. "Lord," he said, his voice a mere whisper, breaking under the weight of his unspoken fears. "I fear I am not strong enough to follow you as you deserve. I am afraid that I will fail you." Jesus turned to him, his face serene and full of understanding, as if he had known Peter's heart all along. He placed a gentle hand on Peter's shoulder, speaking with a tenderness that soothed Peter's troubled spirit. "Peter, failure is not in the moments when you feel weak or stumble. Failure is only in turning away from the light. You are stronger than the shadows that try to claim you. I am here with you always, and my love does not depend on your perfection." Peter felt a tear roll down his cheek, his heart lightened by the gentle, unwavering love in Jesus' words. For the first time, he realized that his worth did not rest on his ability to be flawless. With Jesus beside him, his weakness was transformed into strength, his fear into faith. He felt a quiet peace settle within, a steadfastness that could not be shaken. The disciples moved forward, their spirits bolstered by Peter's vulnerability and Jesus' reassurance. Though the darkness remained, they felt a new resolve, a strength that came not from the absence of fear but from the presence of unwavering love. As they trudged forward, the maze opened into a beautiful, inviting path, the darkness giving way to warm, golden light. The path was lined with vibrant flowers, and a soft breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine. A feeling of relief washed over the disciples, and they couldn't help but feel drawn to the warmth, the promise of an easier path. It seemed to welcome them, to promise an end to their struggle, and each of them felt the pull to walk that way. James stepped forward, his face brightening as he took in the scene. "Lord, is this the end? This path, it seems so peaceful, as though it leads to freedom." There was a hopeful excitement in his voice, a desire to escape the fear and darkness that had weighed on them for so long. The other disciples looked at Jesus, waiting for his answer, eager to find respite. But Jesus shook his head slowly, his gaze thoughtful as he looked down the inviting path. "Sometimes fear takes the form of comfort," he explained. "It whispers that an easier path is better, but the peace it offers is temporary. True peace comes not from running from shadows, but from understanding that they cannot hold you. The journey is not yet over, my friends." The disciples looked at each other, the temptation still pulling at them, but Jesus' words grounded them, steadying their hearts. Though the easier path beckoned, they turned back to the darker, narrower one, knowing now that peace would come from facing their fears, not escaping them. Each of them took a step forward, and the warmth of Jesus' presence dispelled the lingering doubts that had tried to take root. With renewed strength they continued on, trusting in the journey. The narrow path led them down a quiet corridor lined with ancient statues, each face carved in expressions of terror, frozen in time. The shadows cast by the statues seemed to shift, moving in the corners of their vision as if alive. James slowed, his heart pounding as a familiar memory surfaced. A friend he had lost, a choice he had made that he could never undo. The memory played before him, vivid and haunting, a constant reminder of his failure to act, of the life he could not save. James's voice cracked as he spoke, his words tinged with years of unspoken guilt. "Lord, I lost someone. I was too afraid to act, and because of my fear he is gone. I can't help but feel that I failed him." He hung his head, his voice trembling with sorrow, his spirit burdened by years of regret. Jesus knelt beside him, lifting James's gaze with a gentle touch. "James, fear does not make you guilty, nor does it diminish your love. Love endures even when it faces loss. Let go of the guilt, for love is a bond that surpasses every shadow, every choice." Jesus' words seeped into James's heart, filling the wounds left by regret with a deep, healing peace. James felt the weight he had carried for so long begin to lift, and as he took a deep breath, he felt lighter, freer. The other disciples watched in quiet empathy, each moved by the release James experienced. They had witnessed his struggle, and in his healing, they found strength for their own journey forward. As they reached a clearing, a soft moonlight bathed the maze in a gentle glow, illuminating the stillness of the moment. The disciples felt a sense of peace that was both profound and fragile, as though the air itself held their breath. Jesus stood before them, looking at each of them with a love that filled the space, a love that dissolved every fear, every shadow that remained in their hearts. Faith is not the absence of fear, Jesus began, his voice a quiet yet powerful presence. Faith is the trust you hold even in the midst of darkness. The fears you have faced are now shadows behind you. They are no longer chains but lessons, guides toward a stronger light within. The disciples felt a new understanding settle over them, as though they had shed parts of themselves that no longer served them. Each felt a release, a deep sense of freedom and lightness that filled the empty spaces where fear once lived. Some of them shed tears, others stood in quiet awe, all deeply moved by the revelation Jesus had brought them. The dawn broke as they reached the exit of the maze, stepping into a world that felt brighter, fresher, and more alive than before. The garden that greeted them was bathed in golden light, the air fragrant with morning dew. Each disciple looked at one another, their hearts full and spirits renewed. They had faced themselves, their fears, and each had come out stronger with a bond deeper than words. Jesus gathered them close, his eyes filled with a gentle, abiding love. Fear will come again, but faith will always lead you through, he said. With love, with trust, with each other, no shadow can bind you. As they left the maze behind, the disciples knew they had been forever changed. They had faced their fears, but more importantly, they had learned to walk in faith, carrying the light of Jesus' love within them. The journey had brought them closer to each other, and closer to a truth that would guide them for the rest of their lives. They looked back one last time at the maze, now filled with morning light, a symbol of the journey they had overcome, together and forever unbound. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.